This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm Matt Addison. Michael Plant is with me. We are going to touch a little bit on Nottingham Forest, but don't you worry, not too much. We're going to talk Rio Ngumoha, Mohamed, Salah, Cody, Gakpo and a couple of other topics as well throughout the course of the next 25 minutes or so. But before we get into it, we'd like to thank one of two show sponsors today. NordVPN and their app can help you with things like watching sporting events, TV shows and films which aren't available in your region by switching your virtual location to a country which is showing the event. For example, if you're abroad, and then you can access all of your streaming services as you would back home. You can also protect private data like bank details, passwords and your online security, and with one NordVPN account you can be using that on 10 different devices. For more benefits and information, you can download the NordVPN app to your device, click the link in the podcast episode description box, and don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/blood red. That link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. As I mentioned, the link is in the podcast episode description box below. Without further ado, though, let's get stuck into...
Well done. Brilliant.
A deep breath there. And a deep breath as well before we have to talk about what happened at the City ground. Certainly, it was a good end, wasn't it, Michael? Not particularly a good start, middle, or, well, even most of the end was not great for Liverpool, but they did somehow just about manage to beat Nottingham Forest in the end.
Yeah, I'm pleased actually that the narrative hasn't been about the win really, and that actually so much of the talk has been about how bad the performance was. And Arne Slot obviously said it was the worst 45 minutes of the season. There have been a few contenders for that, and a couple of times I feel like we've said that this season, but that certainly was up there. And ultimately, the stat that I keep coming back to that sums up the performance was that Liverpool had one shot in 89 minutes. Sorry, one shot on target in 89 minutes. That sums up how bad the performance was. And ultimately, I think they deserve credit for pushing late to manage to get that injury time. Well, 2 injury time goals, of course, only one stood. And I do think a lot of that actually was down to Arne Slot's substitutions, which maybe has gone overlooked a little bit. And he obviously changed all 4 wide players, and Liverpool did get a lot of joy in those areas and ultimately probably won the match from those positions. So that deserves praise, but overall the performance across the entire game was just simply not good enough. And I think it does sometimes feel like one step forward, 2 back with Liverpool a little bit. The thing I keep coming back to a lot this campaign is that when Slot and Liverpool seem to address one area, there's another area that goes. So, they were more defensively assured in this game, but then they lacked going forward. They lacked any fluency. For instance, that wasn't the case against Brighton as an example. I mean, Brighton's actually not a good example because they played very well in that. But, there've been other games this season where they've been good going forward, poor at the back, where they've had joy in the wide areas, but been, poor in the middle or vice versa. It's happened a lot this season. And that was certainly the case, I think, at the City ground on Sunday. And as we said, it was a really, really poor performance and one that Liverpool got away with.
In terms of the Champions League race, obviously a big one. I know we have to mention this on every single podcast. I'm still fairly confident that Liverpool will do it, but they're going to have to play a lot better than that, certainly. But, I mean, Chelsea had dropped points the day before. We now know that Manchester United didn't drop points against Everton, but at that point, it was up to Liverpool to put that pressure on. I mean, if this was a team going for the title and they play rubbish but get the result, we'd kind of go, look, mentality monsters, they've got themselves over the line, they've put themselves in a position where, they got something they didn't deserve. I mean, that is the case, isn't it? They did well. They deserve credit for doing that, going again. As you mentioned, the substitutions. I mean, I was looking at the bench in that second half and just wondering what on earth Arne Slot could do to change things, because clearly he had to do something, but there wasn't particularly anything obvious on there for him to do. I mean, it's a big result, isn't it? When you look at some of the games that Liverpool have got coming up, West Ham next weekend, Tottenham coming up, Wolves coming up. No game is going to be easy, particularly if Liverpool play as badly as what they did, but they've got winnable fixtures coming up, whereas maybe the teams that they're around have got to play either each other or, I think, is it Chelsea, Arsenal, I think, next weekend. There's opportunities, I think, in the next run of fixtures for Liverpool to gain even more ground on the teams around them, but obviously they can only do that if they play better.
Yeah, and Manchester United and Aston Villa play each other in the next couple of weeks, and you and I have spoken a lot about the Champions League race, and I think that both of us quite confidently predicted a few weeks ago, or even a few months ago, that Man United would not finish above Liverpool. I think that is looking less certain at the moment based on United's form and the fact that they don't have European football. They don't even have the cup competitions, do they? So they only have the Premier League to focus on. So much so that there's even talk of pre-season or mid-season friendlies, isn't there? It's with them. So
very, very Manchester United to do that.
Well, I mean, anyway, we won't get sidetracked by that, but you do wonder when you watch Liverpool at the weekend, and who had 8 days off, Forest, who then played in midweek, and Forest looked so much fresher and so much settled into the game much quicker and were more physical than Liverpool. So that's a bypoint of I suppose, all the fatigue talk and the fixtures and everything like that. But I don't think any of us could have predicted how much Manchester United would improve. They do look much better under Michael Carrick. I'll always temper that with Man United. They are always teetering on the edge of capitulation or disaster. So that could potentially spring up at some point. I think as well, on the flip side, I don't think any of us could have maybe seen Villa's downturn, and Villa are really struggling at the moment, missing a few big players from injury. 6 points, I think the gap is to Liverpool. That's still a pretty significant gap, but you do start wondering now, a few more bad results, and can they be reeled in? And then on the flip side, Chelsea as well they've dropped the last 2 results, been really, really poor. I don't think when Liverpool lost to Man City, we could ever predicted they'd have kind of reeled them in at this point so quickly. So listen, that race I think is going to really keep going down to the wire. And I know you're a big believer that the cup competitions and the league will kind of filter into each other and merge a little bit in terms of performances and results. And so it's not just maybe cut and dry as how the Premier League goes. But yeah, it's going to be one that, I think we'll be talking about this at the start of May. I don't think it's going to be cut and dry by then. Certainly that's the case.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think it's going to go down to the line, and it's just a case of who is the least inconsistent, isn't it? That's what's going to dictate this. I'm not sitting here for a second saying that Liverpool are going to go on a winning run, and I can't remember all of the next 5 games. I listed a couple of the teams that are coming up shortly. Liverpool should win the majority, if not all, of the next 5 games, but I can pretty much guarantee you that they won't. I can also guarantee you that Chelsea and maybe to a lesser extent Manchester United, as you say, with nothing else to focus on, that's not going to be the case for them. But I mean,
Matt, sorry, mate, it's that Liverpool aren't losing matches. That's a big plus at the moment. They're just not losing games, and I think that is encouraging in that run.
Yeah, 2-20. I think that's right. In the last 20, I mean, it doesn't feel like that, but it's certainly been a lot better. But I wanted to go back to the point you made on substitutions and Arne Slot changing the game, because that was obviously a big talking point as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Rio Ngumoha, but obviously it wasn't just him that came on. Liverpool did a couple of things in that second half. I mean, was Rio Ngumoha, do you think, the difference in that game? Because it certainly in the second half, the first half, it looked like Forest were going to win. The second half, it looked like it was just going to be the nillest of nil-nils we've ever seen. But then Rio Ngumoha comes on. Was that the turning point, do you think?
The nil-nillest of games is actually a very good way of summing up that first 90 minutes. Yeah, I think so. And listen, Liverpool were very fortunate in that they played a Forest team who were actually really lacking any sort of an ability to create clear-cut chances, so to say. They had a lot of shots, but they didn't really threaten Alisson. There was that Callum Hudson-Odoi one early on. The centre-back Milenkovic had a good chance to start a second half, but that was basically it. Alisson didn't have a huge amount to do. So for all the talk of the number of shots and the stats and everything, Forest weren't particularly impressive. And sitting in the press box, someone turned to me and said, "Well, that's why they're in a relegation fight," and I don't think you can dispute that. In terms of Ngumoha, listen, he is just a breath of fresh air. I was going to say a fresh breath air, but a breath of fresh air when he comes on the pitch. He is just so enjoyable, I think, to watch. He's obviously got that youthful exuberance. He's fearless. He wants to take people on. He doesn't care about reputation. He doesn't look at someone and worry about their experience and their defensive qualities. He is happy to run at anyone and take them on. And listen, he just brought an extra thrust and kind of surge to Liverpool's attacks late on that I ultimately think did lead to them getting that late winner. I would say as simplistically as this, that if he wouldn't have come on the pitch, I don't think Liverpool would have won that game. He was really, really good. And it's a lot of talk about Ngumoha, and I'm sure we will discuss this further. But I think what is becoming clear to me is he has a bigger role to play than he currently has at Liverpool. That's not me saying he should be playing 90 minutes every week, but I certainly do think there's a bigger role for him to have in this team. I mean, what's your thoughts on it? Would you like to see him playing a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to him generally in a second, but I think the fundamental reality of it at the moment is that the wingers that started that game in Salah and Gakpo just didn't do anywhere near enough. And it's easy to sort of say, well, Rio Ngumoha came on, changed the game, therefore he should be the one going forwards. We'll come in a few minutes' time to sort of why that isn't necessarily the case, isn't true, and isn't really the right solution, I don't think, for Liverpool moving forwards. What they really need is for Salah and for Gakpo to find a little bit of form from somewhere. I thought that Salah against Brighton, that was going to be a bit of a moment for him, but then he's kind of gone back to what he was before that. The ideal situation would be for those two to basically do a good 70, 80 minutes every week, and then Ngumoha can come off the bench and, inject something fresh as he did, but not in the situation where Liverpool need him to do that, but rather just, a bit of extra fresh energy, fresh legs, just to give him those opportunities as and when it suits. I mean, that's the worry, isn't it? That Salah and Gakpo are the experienced players. They're players, I suppose less so with Salah, but certainly with Gakpo, that it's inexplicable that they've fallen off quite so much from where they were. You can put Alexis McAllister probably into that bracket as well. There's a number of players, I think, at Liverpool at the moment, but the two wingers in particular, for me, that I've written something today that will go out overnight around the need to inject a bit more pace and quality in those wide areas ahead of next season, because, without Florian Wirtz at Nottingham Forest, Liverpool just didn't look like scoring a goal.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly that has turned, isn't it? I mean, for a player who didn't score his first goal until late December, that's something Liverpool seems so reliant on him to, well, not just score, but create chances as well. Yeah, listen, I thought Salah was absolutely abysmal against Forest, and I really don't think it should be downplayed just how poor he was. I thought his body language was awful. I thought the big concern I have with Salah as well when I look at him is physically, he doesn't look like the same player as last season. And look, he is obviously, what is he, 33 now? So, he is certainly on the decline, you would expect from his peak years in terms of his physicality, but he has also maintained impeccable physical standards and athleticism. But I just, you look at a performance like that and you really do question how much more of an impact he's ever going to have again in a Liverpool shirt, in truth. And the Brighton game, he was brilliant and we all sang his praises, but I do think that is looking much more at the moment like the exception rather than the norm. And I also think that it was interesting against Brighton that they are a team that allowed Liverpool to play, that allowed Liverpool to get in the ball, that weren't as physical as someone like Forest. And it seems to me at the moment when they come up against physical opponents, Salah is just so lacking. Gakpo, I mean, you and I were discussing it before we started this video, he does seem to do a lot of the same things as last season, but they just don't seem to be working for whatever reason. And I think that, listen, everyone talks about Luis Diaz, and there's no doubt Liverpool are missing Luis Diaz, but if you'd have said to me at the end of last season, would you rather have Gakpo or Diaz, I would have said Gakpo, and I think it's forgotten about sometimes just how good Gakpo was for long spells of last season, and he needs to rediscover that, and certainly confidence is a factor. Listen, I think in general the team were struggling, so this is obviously has bled into his performances a little bit, but in the long term, Salah we're talking about, could he leave in the summer? I don't think there's an expectation that Gakpo will. Liverpool need to find a way to get Gakpo back to the levels of last season, because he signed a new contract, didn't he, last summer, a long-term one as well. So Liverpool need to find a way, as I say, of getting him back to those levels.
Yeah, the Diaz point is a good one, and I think that probably is the way that you get more out of Gakpo, is for him not to just be the only one there. As I mentioned, we're going to come back onto Rio Ngumoha, and hopefully he will become more of an option in the future. But, as it stands right now, probably Cody Gakpo just needs that little bit of extra motivation maybe on one side, but also just the fact that he doesn't have to play every single minute of every game. I know Luis Diaz played quite a lot as a number 9 last season rather than off the left, but to have both of those players in the same position, competing for the same minutes in their favoured role, I think was a big reason why both of them had the best seasons for Liverpool. I don't think it was the wrong decision in the slightest to move Luis Diaz on for a variety of reasons, given his age, his contract, the fact that he wanted to go. That made sense. Liverpool got a really good deal, I think, as well as he's done for Bayern Munich, scored loads of goals, looks really good in Germany. I think it was the right thing. The wrong move was them not having somebody else to come in and play in that position instead of him. Now, we're going to come on and talk about Rio Ngumoha, as I say, in a second. But before we do that, just take a quick time out to thank the show's second sponsor, which is Salah, an affordable, easy-to-use and sustainable eSIM service that gives reliable mobile and internet connections from anywhere in the world. You can save money and eliminate roaming fees with an affordable eSIM data plan in over 200 countries and have a fast and reliable internet connection upon arrival, in your destination. You can download Salah in the App Store or by scanning the QR code which is on screen. You can use our promo code in the podcast episode description box below. At checkout, you'll also get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. But to go back to Rio Ngumoha, I mean, that needed to be a bridge. I think that's where I'm coming from here. Ngumoha is the future. Luis Diaz, I think, is the past. Well, he's the past because he's now moved on. There just needed for me to be something in between.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think you summed that up really well in terms of the summer decisions. And listen, Liverpool essentially went into this season with two wingers in Salah and Gakpo, and then two backups in Chiesa and Ngumoha. And what has been proven over the course of the season is that Slot is unwilling to turn to those, reluctant, shall we say, to turn to the backups, which has meant that Salah and Gakpo have had to play through poor form, through perhaps fatigue, and through other issues. And I mean, Virtus played there a little bit. Obviously, Szoboszlai has as well, but not for any prolonged period. And that is a failure of last summer's transfer window. And we've spoken a lot about how Liverpool added real quality. I don't think that there should be any rewriting of history in that. I think that they brought in some really good, talented players, but they left the squad light. And that's the big area that has suffered is the depth in the wide areas. And I think that Liverpool are obviously now paying the price for that. And I think that you do expect now that maybe Ngumoha, it's becoming more and more difficult for Slot to, ignore his performances first and foremost, but ignore the clamour that's now starting to grow around him to see him play. Because as much as anything, he's having an impact, but he's exciting. Fans want to see players like that to come on and have an impact. And you could envisage a scenario, him, for instance, at the weekend coming on against a West Ham team. I know it was a big cheer erupted at Anfield at the sight of him, stripping off and getting onto the pitch. So, yeah, stripping off is obviously his overtop, I should add. It was probably badly worded, wasn't it? But, yeah. So, I think it is becoming more and more difficult, as I say, for Slot to ignore that clamour. But, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, look, he was very, very good. I thought it was interesting that he played quite a lot from the right. Obviously, he's mainly played on the left for Liverpool, but can do both of those things. The chance he creates, I think it's for the disallowed goal, isn't it, where he does the step overs and beats his man coming from the right-hand side. I thought that was an element that we've not seen a huge amount from him. But I've just found the whole kind of clamour, as you say, from probably more on social media than anything else, but it seems that a lot of people suddenly just go, well, that's it, that's the solution. We've seen it for 10 minutes, let's just do that. But I just think there's so much more to this than just him being, clearly a hugely talented player. But he's a 17-year-old lad. He's somebody who is clearly very, very good, but we haven't seen it across the course of 90 minutes. We've not seen enough evidence to suggest that that is something that he would be capable of. But more importantly than that, I just don't think it would be the best thing for his future. For Liverpool, their stance is always a longer term thing. We heard Arne Slot in his press conferences at the start of the season said, Alexander Isak isn't fit at the moment, but we've not bought him for the next 6 weeks. We've bought him for the next 6 years. You can say for Rio Ngumoha, you've not bought him or not brought him into the team this season for the next 6, 12 games, whatever. You've brought him literally for the next 20 years, potentially. I mean, he's 23 years younger than James Milner. He's just one of these players that you've got a huge amount of talent. I can understand the clamour for it, but I just don't think it would be fair, for one thing, but also physically, we've seen so many players who are currently out injured, Stefan Bajcetic being a good example, Jadon Danns as well, where it's just not the right thing. Now, it might win Liverpool 5 of the next 6 games if you put him in the team and he does really well. But I mean, that's not going to help him in 10 or 15 years' time. You know, Raheem Sterling now, 31 years of age, looking like a player who's considerably older than him. You know, we've got to learn lessons, I think, from those kinds of players. If you go back a little bit further, Wayne Rooney's career didn't go on as long as what it could have done. Michael Owen was, injured for the majority of his career. I can understand why people want the instant, Liverpool have played badly. This guy looks like a solution. Let's put him in. But I just don't think it's fair for him in the short, medium or long term to do that. To me, it doesn't make any sense. It makes much more sense for him to have 15, 20 minutes off the bench here and there. And even that, it might be, once or twice a month for the next year or so. But I just think you've got to look at the bigger picture. And it's hard when Liverpool are in a race for the top 4 and they didn't expect to be. It's hard when players, like we've said, of Salah, Gakpo, others as well, are not playing at that level. But I can understand, and we've heard from Arne Slot loads of times explain this. I think the explanation is perfectly reasonable from him. That's where I stand with it.
Oh, there you go. I've just gone dark. But I mean, yeah, I suspect that's where I'm going to go again. But listen, I agree with everything you've said and how you've summed it up there. Listen, Rio Ngumoha's role at the moment is back up to the starting wide players. That is what his role should be. That's what his role was at the start of the season. I don't think anyone would have questioned that at the start of the season. But I think the question now is perhaps whether should we see him a little bit more? Should we see him a little bit earlier off the bench? Should we see him maybe questionably start the odd Premier League match? Maybe. But the thought that Rio Ngumoha, as you rightly said, is the saviour of this team, is the answer and the solution to all Liverpool's problems is just completely incorrect. So you're right. Liverpool need to be very wary of him. It is huge. I mean, the pressure and expectation on the shoulders of a 17-year-old, it's just immense. And I think back what I was like at 17 or even yourself, Matt, I couldn't have dealt with that. And he seems like a very mature, level-headed lad. Obviously, he stopped in the mix zone at Forest on Sunday. And he seems really, calm and composed as well in himself. But Liverpool need to make sure that's still the case in 5 years' time, and they need to be thinking about this long term. And you mentioned the injuries. I mean, another one to chuck out, James McConnell, Katie Gordon. There's loads of these players that come through and pick up all these injuries, and they just need to be careful about how much they're playing him, because there's also a difference as well between playing under 21s football, playing senior men's football. Is so much more physically demanded for such a young body, but that is still growing. Like, we're still talking about, we're not even talking about a man, we're talking about a boy here. So you're right. We need to be, Liverpool fans need to be careful. I think there's a question about whether he is ready to start a Premier League game. I think that is a conversation that can be had. But yeah, he is not the immediate solution to all the problems. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially in the scenario that we have in the Premier League at the moment, where maybe if it was slightly more technical, maybe if it was a league where the ball was on the floor a lot more than what it is. I mean, what you'd be asking for him now, if let's hypothetically imagine that we could go back in time and start Rio Ngumoha at the City Ground on Sunday. I mean, what would he have been doing for the first hour or 75 minutes of that game before he, in reality, did come on? Well, he would have been tracking back, defending in his own box. He wouldn't have been in the same positions compared to what he was when he does come onto the pitch and then is able to stretch Forest and do what he does. Now, he's a brilliant dribbler. I think there's, still, obviously, given he's 17, a lot of work to do in decision-making and finishing and making those decisions. But we know what he's good at. It's not in his own third, it's in the opposition third. It's on the edge of the penalty area. It's drawing defenders. It's getting people into positions that they don't want to be in when defenders are tired because, mentally they've just had 75, 80 minutes of doing that with not particularly effective Salah and Gakpo, but, in future there'll be Florian Wirtz in there. Hugo Ekitike was probably as bad as we've seen him in a Liverpool shirt, but that won't be the case in future matches. It's that context as well. I think if you put him in from the start in some of these matches, it's not the same situation for him. You're not going to see the same results and outcome from what he does. I just don't think it's a fair comparison with that.
Yeah, it's just a completely different demand, isn't it? He's thrown on to go and win a football match, or against Brighton, for instance, to come on and add, into a game that's got no significance. Arne Slot, for instance, is never going to throw Rio Ngumoha into a game that Liverpool are winning 1-0 going into the last 10 minutes. It's never going to happen. And he benefits from Liverpool having more of the ball, from the fact that the other teams sit back and are defensive, and the onus is on Liverpool to try and unlock and break down that defence, as was the case against Forest on Sunday. And that's where he's really, really good, and he is really exciting. And as I say, I think there is a conversation now to be had about whether he should be starting matches, but up against the physicality of defenders, he's being expected to defend himself, expected to complete the tactical demands, I suppose, that would be placed on him, is a lot. I come back to the pressure on a 17-year-old. You imagine suddenly that something doesn't go right, that he's having a bad game. Away fans are getting on his case. It's just a lot. It's a lot for him to think. With Liverpool, a long-term issue. But I do go back to the same point and say, I think he should be playing more than he currently is. I actually thought about after the Bournemouth game that Liverpool lost last month. I think we need to see a little bit more of him, but only a little bit more is how I would sum it up.
When you say more, then do you mean half an hour off the bench? Is that kind of what you've got in mind? Yeah.
And I mean, it does come back to the same point that I made, that it depends on what the situation and circumstances are of the match. He's never going to come on when Liverpool are winning, as I say, 1-0 going into the final stages of a game. But yeah, the thing is, in the here and now, he's got a lot to offer Liverpool, and I think that while Liverpool have got to be cautious and think about this long term, they've also got to realise now that they have got a real talent who can actually help them win football matches. And so he's trying to find the balance between the two. I think Slot has been slightly overcautious with him. I certainly don't think that's the worst decision or the worst way to handle it. I think you'd rather be overcautious than not kind of cautious enough. But yeah, listen, and we're getting into kind of next season, he'll be 18 as well. He's starting to just continue that maturity and growing up, and he'll have had a full year of Premier League football under his belt. So I suspect, soon we will start seeing him a little bit more. But yeah, he's what in all of this, it just keeps underlining to me is what a huge talent Liverpool have got. And it's so obvious that if they nurture him correctly and harness that talent, that he's going to be a fantastic player in years to come.
Yeah, I put Trainioni into a similar bracket as well. Obviously, he's not quite had the same headlines and stuff. I'm a big fan of him, but the same thing applies to him. Slightly older than Rio Ngumoha. Maybe at some point there'll be a conversation about a loan or a next step, but it is fundamentally the right thing for Liverpool to be very, very calm about the situation. I get the impression as well that the player himself is reasonably happy with how things are going. Obviously, you spoke to him in the mix zone on Sunday. There's a plan in place here. I think sometimes maybe fans on social media get a bit anxious as like, we've got to push him, we've got to give him this, got to give him that, because there is that pathway and progress. But I mean, Liverpool and Rio Ngumoha will be open in the dialogue, the plan. There won't be any surprises for any of these parties here. What did you make of what he said in the mix zone and how he was in that when you spoke to him?
I think I was really impressed with him. As I say, I think back to what I was like when I was 17. He's actually he's half my age almost, which is quite depressing, really. I think my chances of making it as a Premier League footballer are going. I think I'm realising. But no, listen, he was really, really. I thought he came across really well. I think even the decision to stop just speaks volumes for his level of maturity, and I don't mean this in a negative way against these guys, but Mohamed Salah, Joe Gomez, Ibrahim Konate came through. They were asked to stop. They politely declined, and look, those guys have stopped before, so I don't mean that in any kind of negative way towards them. Virgil van Dijk always stops, which I mean is just huge credit to him. I always think that's such a rarity in Premier League football. But you've got these hugely experienced guys that don't want to stop, and in that particular instance, and Rio goes, yeah, I'm happy to stop and speak. And there's a brief scramble, I think, when Liverpool suddenly thought, we've got to, because I think it's 17. I'm not actually sure about the legality of how much he can speak without someone with him as well. So there's a little brief scramble, but I thought he spoke really well. I thought he came across really calm. He will have answered the questions in a way I think the club will certainly be pleased with as well. He spoke about being important to the team. He said that he wanted to play more minutes, as every single footballer in that team would do, but obviously said that he's progressing, that the team's needs comes first, and then that he's just focusing on the end of the season, which Liverpool will be delighted about that. And yeah, it was certainly an interesting one. It was a talking point certainly that he stopped, and you wonder if in 5 years that won't be the case. It'll be actually par for the course in many ways.
Yeah, certainly a very big talent, very impressive as well, as you say, for his age. Whenever you see little bits and pieces of him, he seems very focused and determined, and I'm sure Liverpool will work with him in the best way that they feel can get the most out of him, even if that means playing a little bit less in the short term. Hopefully that will steadily start to grow. But yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Sorry, go on.
I just have one last thing. I asked him, is it important that you're playing for the under-21s? Because I think that is a big question. And I think I've raised in the podcast before. My concern for him would be that essentially this backup role that he's got is that he means he's not playing a huge amount of football in the here and now. And he just said, that it is important that he drops down every so often and plays the under-21s. He did it the other week. Was it against West Brom? He scored a fantastic goal. So I just think that's interesting as well. Those little tidbits and insight that perhaps that's an avenue that he and the club might look to explore, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you made the point as well that he still qualifies to play for the under-18s as well, which still another reminder really of just how young and inexperienced he is. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk plenty about Rio Ngumoha in the next few years, not just the next few weeks. But we'll leave it there for this week. Thanks to Michael for joining me, and as ever for you guys as well for watching and for listening at home. We'll be back next week with another Liverpool.com podcast.
You've been listening to the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.